Hello. My name is Colette Madsen, and I wasn't just humiliated at my sister's wedding. I was seated next to the kitchen, mistaken for staff, and erased from the family photo. All before the FBI stormed in. The music was already playing when I walked in, soft strings, too elegant for the air that hung thick with perfume and judgment. The scent of polished marble and overripe roses made the whole room feel expensive, suffocating. I held the invitation tighter, the embossed letters pressing faintly into my palm. My name gleamed on the envelope but nowhere else. Not on the seating chart shimmering near the door, not on the gilded signage that listed family. I stood still long enough for the planner to notice. The music was already playing when I walked in, soft strings, too elegant for the air that hung thick with perfume and judgment. The scent of polished marble and overripe roses made the whole room feel expensive, suffocating. I held the invitation tighter, the embossed letters pressing faintly into my palm. My name gleamed on the envelope but nowhere else. Not on the seating chart shimmering near the door, not on the gilded signage that listed family. I stood still long enough for the planner to notice. She smiled, the way professionals do when they're paid to smooth over insult. Miss Madsen, of course. Let me check. A pause, then her eyes flickered, quick, embarrassed. You're at table 18. It's right by the service area. Easy access. Easy access. For whom? I nodded, thanked her quietly. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Inside my chest, something delicate bent, not broken yet, just bending the way a small branch does before a storm. I'd promised myself I wouldn't let today undo me. Not again. Walking deeper into the ballroom, I passed clusters of women in silk laughing too loudly, men shaking hands as if sealing mergers instead of marriages. Gold light shimmered on the crystal vases, reflected across every polished surface except the one I stood on. My heels clicked too loud on the marble floor, echoing like footsteps that didn't belong here. Valora's friends saw me first. A few polite nods, a whisper. They knew who I was, the sister who'd stayed quiet, the one without a +1, without the right dress size or the right husband. I gave them a small smile anyway. That's the thing about survival in families like mine, it teaches you to smile while swallowing every sting. Then I heard his voice. Everett Blaine, the groom, the man who treated charm like currency. He stood near the stage, champagne glass lifted. To important people, he said, laughing. This wedding's for the ones who matter. Optics, folks, optics matter. Laughter followed, short and nervous. Maybe they didn't know who he was mocking. Maybe they did. The words landed like a slap anyway. My ears rang, the music dimmed. I could see Valora a few steps away, radiant in satin and compliance. She didn't defend me. She just tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, looked away, and pretended not to notice. I felt the weight of eyes on me, the sympathy of strangers, the curiosity of gossip. I could have turned around. Walked straight out into the parking lot, let the Colorado heat swallow me. But leaving would have written their version of the story, that I didn't fit. That I didn't belong among the important people. So I stayed. The planner led me to my seat near the kitchen curtain. Steam drifted from the swinging doors behind me, garlic, bleach, and roasted salmon mingling in an oddly domestic cloud. I set my purse on the tablecloth and tried not to look at the head table where my family sparkled under chandeliers. A busboy bumped my chair and muttered an apology. It's okay, I said softly. The words came out gentler than I meant. Maybe I was apologizing to him for having to see this. I texted Mom. Made it here. Table 18. No reply. Just the gray dots that appeared for a second, then vanished. I stared until my reflection blurred in the screen. Laughter rolled from the main table, Valora's high note cutting through the noise. She looked like every magazine photo she'd ever copied, flawless, distant, the picture of gratitude. Thanksgiving flashed in my mind, the one 10 years ago when she took the last piece of pie and Mom said, "Let her shine, Colette. You've had your turn." Back then I thought it was just dessert. Now I understood it had been the first rehearsal for today. A young server leaned close and whispered, "I can move you to a better spot later if you want." I shook my head. "No, thank you." My smile was thin, deliberate. "They need to see me right here." He looked puzzled but nodded. The curtain behind me swayed as trays of food passed through. I felt the heat of the kitchen on my back and the chill of distance from my own blood in front. Everett began his toast. "Family taught us refinement," he said, voice slick as the champagne bubbles rising in his glass. They taught us class. Class. The word shimmered between his teeth, heavy with the kind of meaning you can't prove but always feel. I lifted my glass, not to toast, just to have something to hold. Condensation slid over my fingers. I never drank it. When applause ended, a slideshow filled the screen, photos of childhood summers, college graduations, vacations I'd never been invited to. I watched my sister's life play out without me, each frame another erasure. The lights dimmed further. People murmured. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and pressed record. A small, quiet motion. Not revenge. Not yet. Just proof that I existed in this room, in this version of the truth they were crafting. I looked toward the stage. Valora caught my eye for the briefest second, her expression unreadable. Maybe guilt. Maybe annoyance. I smiled, not kindly, just enough to let her know I saw everything. Around me, the guests raised glasses again. I stayed seated. The camera on my phone captured their laughter, the precise cadence of a family comfortable in its cruelty. My heart didn't pound, it steadied. Each breath came measured, deliberate. Invisibility had a rhythm if you listened closely enough. Someone behind me whispered, "Who is she?" I almost answered, "The sister," but the word felt smaller than it should have. I wasn't just the sister. I was the witness. The song changed to something upbeat, absurdly cheerful. Couples moved to the dance floor. The curtain kept brushing my shoulder like a reminder, "You're near the exit, near the heat, near the labor no one sees." I could hear Mom's laugh now, the one she used for audiences. It rose above the music, soft and careful and dangerous. The same tone she used when pretending everything was fine. I thought of leaving again, of letting the night end without a scene. But something in me shifted, quietly, like a lock turning. If they wanted me to be invisible, I would master it until it scared them. I slipped the phone into my purse, stood, and looked around the room one last time. The light from the chandelier caught the rim of my glass, scattering tiny reflections across the floor like fragments of what could have been family. They would remember this image, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because I didn't disappear. I walked slowly toward the back, past the staff preparing another tray, past the laughter that no longer reached me. My footsteps blended with the clatter of plates, two rhythms that belonged to the same ignored music. I paused by the kitchen door, feeling the warm draft brush against my arm. Maybe I'd been standing in this place my whole life, half in, half out, waiting for someone to notice. I wasn't forgotten. I was placed exactly where they thought I belonged. Mom's voice found me before I turned around. "Valora didn't want to stress you," she said, gentle as a hand on glass. "She thought you'd be busy." Her words sliced through the hum of clinking glasses behind us. I felt heat crawl up my neck though the air conditioning was running cold. I kept my back straight, my expression still. The lie would have hurt less if she hadn't rehearsed it so sweetly. I turned slowly. She stood in pale blue satin, pearls at her throat, calm as if this moment were nothing more than a misunderstanding between two sensible women. "You're strong, Colette," she continued. "You don't need this like she does." There it was, the family creed. I don't need things. I endure them. I looked at her smile, perfectly polite, and wondered if she believed her own words. The urge to defend myself bubbled up, but it caught behind my ribs. Around us, laughter rose again from the main table. Valora's voice, light, practiced. Mom shifted her purse. "Try to enjoy yourself," she said. "It's her day." I wanted to ask what day would ever be mine, but I only nodded. Sure. Her day. My voice sounded too quiet even to my own ears. When she left, I stood in the echo of her perfume, floral and expensive, and breathed through the sting. 3 weeks earlier, that same perfume had clung to an envelope I found in my mailbox. There was no name printed on it, no handwriting. Just the return address of the printer Valora used for her event stationery. Inside, a single invitation card. No, dear Colette. No RSVP instructions. Just a printed date and the embossed initials VNE in gold. I'd read it twice before realizing what was missing. The envelope had been mass-mailed, even the stamp was generic. For a moment I thought it was a mistake. I called Valora. Straight to voicemail. That night she texted back. There was a glitch at the printer. Of course you're invited. No apology. No warmth. Just an explanation wrapped like customer service. That week, the wedding group chat bloomed without me. My phone stayed silent while pictures of dresses and floral arrangements appeared on my social feed. When I asked about logistics, Mom said, "Sweetheart, it's mostly for the younger guests." I wasn't that old. Just old enough to be edited out of their story. Now, back in the ballroom, a cousin caught my arm. "You made it," she said, surprise flickering across her face before she recovered. "Everyone's so happy you could come." Happy wasn't the word. Startled, maybe. I smiled anyway. It was easier than explaining how it felt to arrive where no one expected you. That kind of surprise always hurts quietly. I walked toward the dessert table to escape the crowd. Overhead, fairy lights shimmered in a calculated imitation of warmth. From the corner of my eye, I saw Valora surrounded by her bridesmaids. She was laughing, the kind of laugh designed for cameras. "We kept it intimate," she told them. "Just the closest people, you know?" My hand tightened around my clutch until the leather groaned. I traced the seam with my thumb, felt the thread give slightly, one stitch fraying like my patience. The sound of the band tuning their instruments rose behind me. I turned and saw her glance my way, just a flicker. Her smile didn't falter. She was good at that. Always had been. 10 years ago, when Dad died, she'd smiled the same way while people whispered condolences. Mom had said, "Look at her composure. That's class." No one noticed my shaking hands as I folded the funeral programs. I stepped closer now, until we were separated only by a few guests shifting plates of cake. "Valora," I said softly. She turned, her eyes narrowing for a heartbeat before relaxing into polite surprise. "Colette. You're here." "I am," I said. "And I know you didn't want me here. But you invited the idea of me, the placeholder of a good sister." Her lips parted, color rising under her makeup. "Why are you doing this now?" she whispered. "Because if I didn't say it now, I'd keep carrying it. Because you've practiced pretending so long, maybe you believe it." She blinked, mask slipping for half a breath. "This is supposed to be a happy day," she said. "For who?" The silence between us swelled, then cracked when one of her friends called her name. She turned toward the voice as if pulled by a leash of obligation. "We'll talk later," she murmured. I almost laughed. We never talked later. I stood still while they moved away, their dresses glimmering like a flock of careless birds. The music shifted to something light again, forcing everyone to pretend joy. I didn't. A waiter approached, holding a glass of water. "You look like you could use this," he said gently. "Thank you." My voice came steadier this time. I accepted the glass, felt the cool against my palm, and nodded. He smiled briefly, then disappeared into the swirl of guests. I walked back toward the kitchen door where the light was dimmer, safer. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded note, the one I'd written weeks ago after the invitation arrived. It wasn't long. Just a few lines scribbled after midnight when I realized the depth of what I already knew. If they want peace, let them have it. You don't have to attend every ceremony built on omission. I never mailed it. I brought it instead, as proof that I'd once considered walking away. I unfolded it now and stared at the handwriting. I didn't read the words. I just felt their weight. The paper was creased from being handled too often, soft at the edges like something worn thin by hope. Across the room, laughter lifted again, bright and false. Mom was near the stage, gesturing proudly as if she'd choreographed the whole event. Valora leaned into Everett's shoulder, radiant, untouchable. A cousin caught my eye again and mouthed, "Come join us." I smiled and shook my head. My chair near the kitchen stayed empty. Maybe it always would. I folded the note once more and slipped it back into my purse. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because the ache had aged, it had gone from sharp to dull, from loud to steady. I took one last look at my sister. She had everything she thought she wanted, the applause, the cameras, the validation of a man who loved optics more than truth. I whispered to myself, softly, almost like a prayer, I hope she never learns the cost. It wasn't her silence that broke me. It was realizing I'd been asking for it to end for years, and no one ever heard me whisper stop. The applause for the toasts was still echoing when the flower girl drifted toward me, a tiny blur of lace and sugar. She stumbled, giggling, and dropped a gift bag right into my lap. "Oops, wrong table," she said, before skipping back to the adults who would remember her as adorable. I stared at the bag resting against my dress. It wasn't heavy, but it pulled something inside me down, the way bad news always does before you open it. I peeked inside. Tissue paper. A small box wrapped in ivory ribbon. Underneath it, an envelope marked Confidential, Blaine Group LLC. My heart caught on that single word, confidential. The company Everett bragged about, the business Valora never seemed to understand but loved to flaunt. My fingertips tingled as I unfolded the paper. A list of payments, dates, account numbers, one of them too familiar. Mine. I read it twice, slower the second time, each digit lining up with the deposit I had made weeks earlier. $8,000, venue emergency. There was no credit to my name, only a note beside it, private contribution, verified by Blaine. My stomach twisted. I pressed the paper between my palms to steady my hands. My name didn't appear, but my account number glowed like an accusation. The music changed, a lazy waltz that sounded elegant but false. Around me, guests toasted again. I folded the document, slid it back under the ribbon, and smiled at nothing. I had learned long ago that composure was cheaper than confrontation. A month earlier, the phone had rung at midnight. Valora's voice came through the static, fragile and syrup-sweet. "Sis, I wouldn't ask, but we're short on the deposit for the venue. They're threatening to cancel if we don't wire it tomorrow. I promise I'll pay you back." I remembered sitting in bed, the glow of my laptop casting blue light on the checkbook beside me. "How much?" "8." She hesitated. "8,000. I had sighed, not at the number but at the familiarity of her asking. "Okay," I said. "Just keep it between us. No announcements. No thanks online." She cried then. "You saved me again." I believed her tears. I always did. I hung up and transferred the money, labeling it family assistance. My accountant would call it generosity. My therapist would call it enabling. I called it love. Quiet, complicated love that always ran one direction. Now, watching the man she was marrying lift a glass in public gratitude to someone else, I felt that love shrivel into something harder. Everett's voice boomed, charming and rehearsed. "We couldn't have done any of this without our dear friend Jonah, my business partner, who stepped in at the last minute." Applause. A few whistles. Jonah, red-faced and smug, winked at Valora. She beamed. I stayed still, fingers digging into my palm until the crescent marks pulsed. That was my last emergency fund, the one meant for my own roof repairs. For the future I kept postponing. The ballroom spun with laughter and glass. I folded the document again and slipped it beneath the tablecloth, as if burying evidence. But it was already alive inside me, breathing like a new truth. I opened my phone under the table, the screen lighting my lap. In my encrypted notes app one typed, Everett Blaine plus Jonah Marks, financial collusion, document timestamp 3:47 p.m. I added one line under it, not revenge. Insurance. My hand trembled once, then steadied. A photographer called out for family to gather by the stage. Someone gestured for me to move aside, polite but firm. "We'll need this space for the shot." "Of course," I said. I stepped back, not out of shame but calculation. They crowded together, the smiling couple, Mom glowing with relief that everything looked perfect, the bridesmaids shimmering in matching champagne tones. The flash popped. I watched through the screen of my phone, recording. A simple photo, a frozen truth, everyone responsible in one frame. Everett turned toward the crowd. "Let's get one with the real family," he said. The word real hung in the air like smoke. Valora laughed lightly, as if it were just a joke, but her hand on his arm said agreement. Someone touched my elbow. The planner again. "Would you like to join after we get a few of just them?" "No," I said quietly. "This one's perfect." The planner smiled uncertainly and moved away. For the first time all day, I felt the weight shift. I wasn't fighting to belong anymore, I was observing. Documenting. That's what auditors do, we note patterns, gather data, let facts tell their story. My father used to say, "Paper trails never lie, honey." Maybe he'd been wrong about many things, but not that. I waded through another toast. Everett spoke about integrity, about building a legacy with the right people. I almost laughed. The hypocrisy was so dense it could have suffocated anyone less practiced at holding their breath. Valora clinked her glass against his. "To family," she said, smiling toward Mom. I mouthed the word back, family, and it tasted like something I no longer owed them. As applause swelled, I caught the reflection of myself in the mirrored column near the bar. The woman looking back wasn't invisible anymore. She looked tired, yes, but sharp, like glass ground down until it could cut cleanly. The DJ called again, all family members to the stage for one last picture. This time, I didn't move. I stayed where I was, near the shadow of the kitchen curtain, the place they'd assigned me from the beginning. The irony made me smile, quietly, softly. Mom waved at me from the front, mouthing "Come on." I shook my head. She frowned, turned back to the camera, and placed her hand on Valora's shoulder, as if arranging her trophies. I lifted my phone one last time. The camera focused, clicked, caught them all in perfect light. Their happiness shimmered, but I could already see the cracks, the way Valora's ring caught glare like a warning, the way Everett's jaw tensed when the photographer asked him to smile wider. They thought they were posing for a memory. I was framing evidence. The room erupted into cheers as the band began again. People danced. Glasses clinked. I stood still, invisible by design, letting the noise wash over me until it turned to static. Inside that hum, I could hear my own breath, steady, calm, deliberate. I slipped the folded document back into the gift bag and set it beneath my chair, hiding it in plain sight. I would retrieve it later. I always retrieved what others left behind. Valora passed by with Everett on her arm. She looked radiant, untouchable. He bent close, whispering something that made her laugh too loudly. For a second, our eyes met. Hers widened, guilt or irritation, I couldn't tell. I gave her a polite nod, the same one strangers exchange when they recognize each other in a place they shouldn't be. Then I turned toward the exit. My hand brushed the curtain, still warm from the kitchen behind it. I thought of the envelope stamped "Confidential," the same way families stamp their secrets, unspoken but binding. I wasn't trying to ruin her wedding. I was documenting its collapse. The air outside was cool, sharp enough to clear the noise that had been pressing on my chest. I stood on the steps of the hotel, holding the railing as guests filed out behind me, laughter already turning into gossip. My phone vibrated in my hand. A name glowed on the screen, one I hadn't seen in years. Isolde Wren. I pressed play. Her voice carried the same gravelly calm I remembered from childhood, a voice that never flinched. "I'm not welcome," she said, "but I know what Blaine Group is hiding. You weren't wrong, Colette." The message was timestamped that morning, hours before the ceremony even began. For a moment, I just stood there, the noise from the valet line blurring into background static. The evening light glinted off the cars pulling up, each one carrying people who believed in appearances. I wanted to call her back, to hear that voice again, not the message of warning, but the tone of belonging I hadn't heard since she was banished from us. 10 years ago, Thanksgiving. I could still smell the burnt gravy and pine candles, still see the shimmer of the good silverware Mom only used for reputation. Isolde had been at the table that year, her laughter filling the house like sunlight through dusty windows. Then she asked the wrong question. "Valora," she'd said, cutting her turkey with calm precision, "did you ever file that report for the Youth Center Fund?" Valora froze. I remember the pause, the kind of pause that rearranges the air. She smiled, slow and practiced. "Of course." "Why?" Isolde didn't blink. "Because the non-profit called me. The grant check's missing. I signed off the funds myself." The room went silent. Dad coughed into his napkin. Mom's face hardened. "You always hated my daughter's shine," she said. It went downhill after that. Isolde stood, placed her napkin neatly on the table, and said, "Shine doesn't require theft, Vera." By dessert, she was gone. By Christmas, her number was blocked. "I was told to stay neutral, for peace," Mom said. But I kept the letter she mailed later, a short note on plain stationery. "The truth will always outlive the denial that tries to bury it." I had folded it inside an old book of mine for years, maybe as proof that someone in this family once told the truth. Now she was back, not in person but through that voice message. I replayed it once more, quietly. "I dug into Everett's records 2 weeks ago," she said. "I've flagged 3 irregular shell accounts. I'm filing an alert Monday. But someone from family needs to move first." I texted back with shaking fingers, "I found something too." Inside, through the glass doors, I could see Valora's reflection, still radiant, accepting compliments she didn't deserve. Mom hovered beside her, hand on her shoulder like she was presenting an exhibit. The phone pinged again. Isolde sent a series of screenshots. Fake consulting invoices, accounts tied to the same address Jonah had used on Everett's corporate filings. Each file was labeled, each timestamped. I downloaded them one by one, my thumb hovering over each blue checkmark until I saw completed. Meet me tomorrow morning, her text read. 9. West Elm Cafe. Bring what you found. I typed back, understood. My fingers paused before I hit send. I hadn't said her name out loud in years. I whispered it now, softly, like an apology. Later, inside the lobby restroom, I locked myself into a stall and opened the PDF she'd sent. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, too bright, too honest. On the screen, numbers cascaded, payments to a Jonah Marks Consulting, each one identical in amount, all within the past month. I scrolled until I saw a note in the margin of one document, transcribed by V. Quinn. My breath caught. My sister's initials in her own hand. I'd always known she was reckless, but not that she was complicit. I leaned against the cool metal of the stall, letting it steady me. I wasn't the only one who saw them clearly, I realized. Just the only one who stayed. The thought settled gently, like a truth finally finding room to breathe. When I stepped out, I checked the mirror. The woman staring back looked exhausted but not defeated. I fixed a strand of hair, wiped the faint trace of mascara, and walked toward the bar. Mom was there, her posture crisp, pretending not to be waiting for me. You left in the middle of the group photo, she said, voice low. People noticed. Did they? I sat beside her, signaling the bartender for water. She sighed. You're not going to start another war like Isolde, are you? That woman destroyed family unity. I almost laughed. You mean she told the truth? Don't be dramatic, she said. You always think everything's some moral battle. It usually is when money's involved, I answered quietly. She turned toward me then, eyes narrowing. You're jealous. You always were. You can't stand that Valora has what you don't. Which is what? Charm, she said simply. People like her. I studied her face, the lines carved by years of control. Charm doesn't protect you from audits, Mom. Her head snapped slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said softly. Just conversation. We sat in silence, the kind that stretched but didn't break. She looked at me as if measuring how far I'd drifted from obedience. You've changed, she said finally. I hope so. She took her purse, ready to leave. This family doesn't need another crusader. I smiled, gently but without warmth. Then you should have stopped making martyrs. Her expression froze, but she didn't respond. She walked away, heels clicking against the marble, every step a retreat into her preferred fiction. When she was gone, I exhaled slowly. The bar felt quieter without her, though the same song played overhead. I reached for my phone, typed a note beneath Isolde's message, Monday. Act fast. Somewhere behind me, the laughter from Valora's crowd echoed again, hollow and practiced. I thought of that letter in the old book, its edges yellowing with time. The truth will always outlive denial. Maybe Isolde had been right all along. The bartender placed a napkin beside my glass. You okay, ma'am? I nodded. Just catching up with family. My voice came out steady. Healing didn't arrive suddenly. It happened softly, step by step. I paid the bill, left a tip, and walked toward the exit where the air felt freer. The city lights shimmered like tiny admissions in the dark. I used to feel alone in the shadows. Turns out, I was standing beside the one person who knew how to cut through them. Morning arrived gray and slow, the kind that made every noise sound heavier than it should. I sat on the edge of my bed, still half-dressed from the night before, the phone lying face down beside me. When it rang, I didn't flinch. I already knew who it would be. Colette, Mom's voice came through soft, careful. We should talk. Before things spiral. There was no question in her tone, only assumption, the same one she had used all my life. The world revolved around her ability to manage appearances. I glanced at the cup of cold coffee on my nightstand, then said quietly, my place. 1 hour. She hesitated. Wouldn't you rather meet at the cafe? No, I said. Here. When she arrived, she came bearing peace offerings, a white box of croissants, a bouquet that still dripped water onto the floor, and that expression she wore like armor, concern wrapped in condescension. You look tired, she said, settling into the chair across from me. These things take energy out of everyone. These things? I asked. She waved her hand. Family events. You always let them affect you too deeply. I poured coffee into 2 mugs, handed one to her, and sat opposite. I suppose being humiliated takes energy too. Humiliated? Her brows rose in practiced disbelief. You weren't humiliated, dear. You were overreacting. You know how sensitive you can be. I felt my shoulders stiffen. Sensitive, her favorite word for dismissing me. If you called to minimize everything, you could have saved the drive. Her smile faltered for a heartbeat, then returned, brittle. Colette, I'm trying to help. You need to let this go. It's not just about Valora, it's about all of us. Your reputation too. There it was again, the collective shield she called family. Every time she said we, she meant you. I leaned forward. You mean your reputation? You're worried people will start asking how your son-in-law runs his company, or how your daughter pays for things she can't afford. Her mouth tightened. That's not fair. Fair? I said softly. Was it fair when you told me to stay quiet at Thanksgiving? When you told me Isolde was jealous instead of right? She exhaled sharply. That woman poisoned you. I slid my phone onto the table between us, screen down. You always said that, Mom. But she was the only one who told the truth. The silence stretched long enough for the clock to tick twice. Then she straightened, smoothing her blouse. You've always had a flair for drama, like your aunt. I'm not going to let you start another war in this family. I met her eyes. I'm not starting anything. I'm finishing it. Don't talk to me like that. Her voice cracked for the first time. I wanted to feel guilty, but the years of swallowing my own anger had left no room for guilt. You called me strong, I said quietly, so you wouldn't have to protect me. You used that word like a leash. Her eyes flickered. You've misunderstood everything I did for you. No, I whispered. I finally understand it. We sat in silence. Outside, a siren wailed faintly, fading down the block. Mom lifted her coffee but didn't drink it. Her lipstick left a perfect crescent on the rim before she set it back down. You'll regret this one day, she said softly. Family is all that lasts. Then you should have valued it more. Her chair scraped against the floor as she stood. She picked up her purse and the box of pastries, though she left the flowers. You've turned into a cold woman, Colette. I stood too, blocking the doorway. Cold is easier than naive. She looked at me, really looked, and for the briefest second I saw something flicker behind her control. Fear, maybe. Or shame. You always think you're the smartest in the room, she said. No, I answered. Just the one keeping records. She paused at the door. You sound just like her. Good. After she left, the apartment felt larger, quieter. I sat back down and opened my phone. The recording app was still running. Her voice filled the room, soft, manipulative, perfectly clear. You need to let this go, your reputation too. I replayed it once, then saved the file to my secure drive. On my laptop, I opened the folder titled Family, Legal. Inside were documents from Isolde, copies of Everett's invoices, and now, this new recording. I added tags, undue pressure, manipulation. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. I scrolled through the files, each one a piece of proof that I hadn't imagined years of gaslighting. They were patterns, not coincidences. The folder name looked too clinical, too detached. I clicked rename and typed, protection, not spite. My reflection in the dark laptop screen looked calm, almost serene. Healing never comes with applause, it comes quietly, like breathing after a long dive. I closed the computer, leaned back, and listened to the hum of the refrigerator. The house felt still for the first time in months. The bouquet she'd left on the counter dripped a small puddle onto the tile. I let it. Some things needed to leak before they could dry out. When the phone buzzed again, I didn't answer. I didn't need another conversation built on conditions. I had all the proof I needed, and for once, all the power I'd never asked for. I wasn't the one who made this adversarial. But I'd be the one who finished it clean. The email notification blinked across my phone screen just after I deleted Mom's number. Brunch at our place, the subject line read. Valora. She'd used the wedding mailing list, of course, grouped me in with acquaintances and distant cousins she only remembered when it made her look gracious. The irony made me smile, softly. Brunch. As if a lukewarm plate of quiche and curated playlists could smooth over the wreckage of the past 2 days. But I said yes. Not to make peace, this wasn't that kind of story. I agreed to show up because sometimes the most radical act of resistance is showing up anyway. When I arrived at their condo, the door was already ajar. Everett's voice drifted through the entryway, warm and fake. "Oh, you made it," he said when I stepped in. "Colette, come in. You look," he paused, searching for the word. "Fresh." That wasn't a compliment. Not from him. The living room looked like something staged for a magazine shoot, vases balanced on the edge of mid-century tables, linen napkins folded in geometric perfection, the scent of peonies fighting to mask something less beautiful underneath. I didn't dress for them. Black slacks, an old blouse, no makeup. I used to walk into spaces like this hoping not to offend. Now I walked in to be unmissable. Valora floated toward me in a pale pink wrap dress, eyes calculating behind her smile. "You came," she said like it was unexpected, like I'd done something bold. I was invited. Everett handed me a mimosa, the glass chilled but already sweating. I declined with a quiet, "I'm fine." He set it down untouched. A few other guests milled around, people I didn't recognize or didn't want to. Valora clinked her glass and called for attention. "We just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice dripping with sincerity. "To everyone who supported us selflessly." Selflessly. She didn't look at me. I sat on the edge of a cream-colored couch, my tote beside me, the corner of a manila envelope just barely peeking out. Everett perched on the arm of a chair like he was shooting a campaign ad. "Colette," he said, turning toward me, "are you still working with that nonprofit? The women's rights thing?" "Still am." I smiled. "The oversight division." Mom cleared her throat from across the room. "That must be exhausting," she offered. "All that digging and questioning people's intentions." I met her gaze. "Not as exhausting as pretending everything's fine when it isn't." There was a moment of silence, and I let it hang in the air, heavy and necessary. A flash of memory tugged at me, months earlier, my hands hovering over the keyboard, wiring Valora thousands from my savings. "Just a venue deposit," she'd said. "Emergency." She'd cried then, breath hitching like it used to when she was little. "You're helping us build something beautiful," Everett had said on voicemail at 2 a.m. That was the night I began saving their messages. Now, he leaned in with that rehearsed smile. "We have something for you, Colette," he said, pulling out a small white card. "Just a token of our appreciation." I took it. A gift card to a spa I'd never visit. The kind of thank you people give when they want to look generous without being held accountable. I reached into my tote and pulled out my own envelope. No bow, no branding. Just facts. "This is my version of thank yous," I said, setting it gently on the table between us. Everett froze. Valora frowned. "What's this?" she asked. "Receipts," I said quietly. "Wire transfers. Screenshots. Invoices tied to Jonah. A list of every dollar you borrowed from me and forgot to mention." Everett's smile disappeared. "Colette, if this is some kind of joke." "It isn't." I tapped the envelope once. "I suggest reviewing it with legal counsel before any further asset movement." Valora's face shifted, panic curdling the edges of her composure. "You've been collecting this? Why would you?" "Because I stopped being nice the moment you made silence a condition of love." Mom stepped forward. "Colette, we don't air family business like this." "No," I said calmly. "We bury it. And then we pretend it never existed." I stood, letting my gaze sweep over the room. These people who never saw me now couldn't look away. "Next time you talk about family loyalty," I said to Everett, "make sure it's not borrowed money and other people's silence you're spending." I turned toward the door, my breath steady. The envelope stayed behind. Let it sit there like a crack in the drywall, visible only if you cared to look. On the sidewalk, the morning was already warming. I pulled out my phone. One new notification. No name. Just a message, "Nice move. But they're already planning damage control." I gave them a choice. That was more than they gave me. The text still glowed on my screen as I sat at the kitchen table, coffee untouched, the words slicing cleaner than any knife, "Nice move. But they're already planning damage control." Of course they were. Valora had always been good at rewrites. She could repaint betrayal as miscommunication and call humiliation a misunderstanding. I opened my laptop anyway, needing to see it with my own eyes. The first video appeared under her name, Valora Quinn Blaine. A reel stitched together from the wedding, the string quartet swelling, the gold-lit dance floor, Everett's toast cropped to make him look noble. His hand brushed her cheek. Her laughter was perfectly timed. The caption read, "A celebration of love, family, and legacy." Legacy. The word tightened around my chest. I scrolled down. Hundreds of likes already. Friends, clients, people who believed in appearances. And then the comments began. So elegant. Couple goals. Your sister must be so proud. Then, buried halfway down, one line that stopped my breath. Wasn't Colette seated near the waitstaff? I thought she was staff. The laughter in my memory collided with the sharp ache in my ribs. I closed the laptop softly. For a moment, I just sat there, letting the silence thicken. She had edited me out completely, cropped me from the photos, from the narrative, from her public version of truth. But she couldn't erase the details that lived in my bones. A week before the wedding, Valora had called. Her tone had been light, careful. "I wasn't sure you'd even attend, with your job and all," she'd said, voice stretching the words like taffy. "You invited me, didn't you?" I'd asked. There was a pause, the faint click of her nails against the phone. Technically, yes. I should have known then. The invitation had never been about inclusion, it was about optics. She needed a sister to complete the family picture, not a witness who remembered too much. I stood, walking toward the closet where the dress hung. Dusty gray, she'd suggested when I'd asked about the color scheme. Understated elegance. You don't want to clash with the decor. Understated. That word still made my teeth clench. I pulled the dress out, laid it across the bed. In daylight, it looked almost silver, but in the ballroom's lighting, it had been the same dull tone as the catering staff's uniforms. I picked up my phone and opened one of the guest videos saved online. There I was, in the background, slightly blurred, standing near the kitchen doors. A waiter brushed past and, mistaking me for one of them, handed me a tray of empty glasses. I watched myself take it automatically, out of reflex, out of years of conditioning to help, to serve, to keep things smooth. The humiliation burned slower now, like coal instead of fire. It didn't sting, it steadied. A message popped up from Ava, an old colleague who had seen more than most. "Saw the reel," she wrote. "You didn't deserve that. I'd have walked out." I typed back, "That's the difference." I didn't walk out. I stayed. I saw everything. The truth of that settled softly in my chest. For months, I'd been drafting a post on my personal blog. It wasn't meant to be public, it had been therapy, a place to store words too heavy to carry. But that morning, watching Valora bask in curated perfection, something shifted. I opened the draft folder. The title glowed like a dare, "How It Feels to Be Seated Near the Kitchen at Your Own Sister's Wedding." I read the first lines again, editing quietly. They called it family seating. I called it exile. The kitchen door stayed open all night, and I learned what it means to clap for people who erase you. My hands trembled slightly as I hovered over the Publish button. A small, quiet click, and it was done. At first, nothing happened. The page refreshed, the post appeared on the front of my blog, dated and timestamped. I closed the tab, finished my cold coffee, and went for a walk. The morning air tasted clean, almost forgiving. By afternoon, the first notification came. Then another. And another. I've lived this. This happened to me at my brother's graduation. Thank you for writing what we've always swallowed. The flood grew quietly, not viral yet, but persistent, the steady hum of recognition spreading through strangers who suddenly didn't feel alone. Around dinner, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "You really posted it?" The text was short, clipped, familiar. "Valora." I didn't respond. Instead, I reopened my blog, scrolling through the comments that kept multiplying. People weren't talking about her, they were talking about themselves. About invisibility, about family hierarchies, about being told to dim their own light so someone else could shine brighter. It was never about one wedding. It was about a pattern. I sat by the window, the sunset pooling against the horizon, and felt something quiet bloom inside me. Not triumph, something calmer, heavier, like the relief of finally putting down a load you didn't realize you'd been carrying. At 9, my phone rang again. Mom. I let it go to voicemail. Then Everett's name appeared. Then blocked numbers. The world was shifting, and they could feel it. I read one more comment before turning off the screen. It's strange, someone had written, how silence can feel like violence when it comes from family. That line stayed with me as I washed the coffee mug, as the sky outside turned indigo. I moved gently, deliberately. Healing wasn't a roar, it was a whisper that grew steady in the chest. Before bed, I opened the post again. Thousands of views now. I added a small note at the end, to anyone who has ever been seated near the kitchen, I see you. They had the spotlight. But I had the truth. And truth burns longer than applause. The next morning sunlight sliced through the kitchen window, turning the steam from my mug into gold. My phone buzzed against the table. Unknown number. I almost ignored it until I saw the subject line, follow-up to complaint submission, case, Blaine Group LLC. Agent Morales. For a second I just stared, my breath shallow, pulse thrumming in my ears. Then I opened it. Ms. Madsen, it began. We're confirming receipt of your materials. Additional corroborating evidence was submitted by a second party. Action is in progress. We will update you post-review. A second party. Isolde, I thought. Or maybe someone else who'd finally decided to stop pretending not to see. Either way, the words hit like a closing door, the quiet kind that changes everything. I set the phone down, exhaled slowly. It was done. Or at least, no longer mine to control. Outside, the street was waking up. Trash trucks rumbled past, a neighbor's dog barked at nothing. I watched light crawl across the countertop, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small inside my own home. Still, relief has its own kind of ache. A notification blinked, news alert. I tapped it, not ready but unable to resist. Breaking, federal authorities execute warrant at Blaine Group headquarters and private residence. Sources confirm investigation into alleged wire fraud and embezzlement. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the counter to steady myself. Flashback, wedding day, mid-toast. I hadn't been there when the doors opened, but I could see it now as if standing in the corner, the glittering ballroom, the sudden silence, champagne flutes frozen halfway to painted lips. The music stopping mid-note. The gasp before the whisper. Two agents stepping forward. One speaking clearly over the echo of heels on marble. Everett Blaine, you're under investigation for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Valora's flute slipping from her hand, crystal shattering against tile. Everett straightening his tie, color draining from his face. Mom's hand pressed against her chest, whispering something that sounded like prayer but felt more like panic. He always looked like a man who believed consequences were for other people. I imagined the murmurs spreading through the guests, phones sliding from purses, discreet recording buttons pressed. Everyone who had laughed at his toasts now looking anywhere but at him. They said later that Valora tried to follow him when they took him out, barefoot, sobbing, but a female agent stopped her. The cameras caught the whole thing, her perfect makeup streaked, her mother clutching her arm, the veil of wealth lifting just long enough for the world to glimpse the truth beneath. By evening the footage hit social media. My blog post had already been circulating quietly, but now it caught fire. Someone reposted it alongside a photo of the arrest. The headline read, "Sister who spoke out against Blaine wedding was right." I scrolled through comments until the words blurred. I used to work for him. Everything she wrote is true. This woman deserves a medal. So much for important people. I didn't type a single response. The silence between each line felt louder than any victory speech could. The ripple spread fast. By midnight, screenshots surfaced of Everett's campaign donations, false invoices, shell companies that folded overnight. Journalists dug deeper, investors panicked. And then came the statement from Blaine Group, "We are cooperating fully with authorities." The same bland phrase every guilty executive clings to. I poured another cup of coffee and watched the notifications pile up. Every ping was another fracture in the image Valora had spent her life polishing. By noon, she deleted every wedding photo from her accounts. The captions vanished, "Forever begins today." Gone. Two souls, one future. Gone. Brands that once fawned over her issued their quiet press releases, "We've paused all collaborations." A text from Mom appeared around 3, "Please stop feeding this. It's destroying her." I didn't answer. There are silences that wound, there are silences that heal. Mine was the latter. An hour later Valora messaged me directly. "Please take the post down. You've made your point." I stared at the screen. The words were almost tender, if you ignored the entitlement behind them. I typed nothing. Closed the phone. In the evening I stepped outside. The air smelled like rain though the sky was clear. Across the street, a couple argued in low voices, then laughed. Normal life went on while mine quietly shifted into something unrecognizable. I sat on the porch steps and thought about Dad, about how he used to say, "You can't build forever on other people's backs. The foundation won't hold." They built everything to look flawless. And now every surface was cracked, beautiful, but burned. The leaves outside had turned brittle and gold, crunching under my boots as I crossed the cracked sidewalk toward the community center. The wind bit through my navy cardigan, not cruelly, but with the kind of honesty that comes after pretending is no longer an option. I carried a folder labeled Victim Advocacy Fund in one hand, a box of tissues in the other. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. The room smelled like instant coffee and floor polish, like something both hopeful and tired. Rows of folding chairs faced the whiteboard, where I had written in block letters, "What part of your story was never told?" I set my things down slowly, feeling the weight of the space settle around me. A few women began trickling in, older, younger, some with notebooks, some with nothing but quiet eyes. They didn't come looking for rescue. They came looking for recognition. We started slowly. I didn't introduce myself like a counselor or expert. I just said, "I've been erased before." It didn't kill me, but it made everything feel like a lie. That's all it took. One woman spoke about being left out of her father's will after caring for him for 10 years. Another shared how her sister sold their mother's house behind her back. No one interrupted. No one fixed anything. We just listened. And as I listened, I felt something inside me loosen, not break, not collapse, just gently unfold. It had been almost 4 weeks since the wedding fell apart like a paper swan in rain. A few days after the arrest, I'd found myself sitting on my apartment floor, surrounded by printouts, invoices, court filings, and the blog post glowing on my screen. I'd whispered to no one in particular, "I won't waste this pain. Not again." I meant it. That morning, my phone had buzzed again. A voicemail. Galora's voice, thinner than I remembered. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it would get this far," she said. "But please, if you still care at all, I'm scared." She didn't ask how I was. Just if I'd help her stop the fire she helped light. I forwarded the message to my lawyer. I didn't reply. Not because I was bitter. But because I was finally done making exceptions for people who turned me into a placeholder. The class went quiet as one woman paused, tears caught in the creases of her voice. "I feel like I was replaced before I even left the room," she said. I nodded. "That's what makes it hardest. When they act like you were never meant to stay." She reached for a tissue. "Exactly." I passed out index cards next, nothing dramatic, just a way to let people say what they couldn't speak yet. "You can write as little or as much as you want," I told them. "No names unless you want to. Just finish this sentence." The part one never said was. They wrote slowly. Gently. Some hands shook. Mine did too. I glanced at the board again. The question hung there like a gentle dare. When the class ended, I stacked the cards in a small box and locked them away, not to hide, but to protect. Some truths were still too raw to breathe out loud. Walking home that evening, the cold air felt different. Not unkind, just real. I passed a couple holding hands, a man unloading groceries, a dog barking at the wind. Life continued in small, forgiving pieces. At the corner, I paused. My phone buzzed again. Agent Morales. The message was brief, settlement talks ongoing. "You're still listed as initial complainant. You have the right to speak, if you choose." I smiled faintly, then locked the screen. I didn't want revenge. I wanted rest. And space. And silence that no longer asked me to shrink. The hardest part wasn't forgiving. It was realizing I didn't have to return just because someone finally opened the door. I didn't burn the bridge. I just stopped standing on it, waiting for someone to cross. Sometimes, healing isn't about who apologizes, it's about who decides to stop waiting for one. If you've ever been the quiet one in the corner, the one left out of the photo, the one seated near the kitchen, then you already know, silence can be its own kind of war. What would you have done if it were your sister? If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and share your own experience in the comments. Your voice matters, and someone out there needs to hear it.